These days, we have a lot of founders who are themselves engineers and scientists, somebody from technical backgrounds.
There are like two different types of founders. So the one is someone like from mostly like sales.
Intuition gets developed on the data from the market.
Like, what are the major lessons learned that changed your way to judge whether the founders actually building something real?
The more regressions you can run, the more convergence you can run. So eventually that data leads you to the place of the greatest traction in that particular area.
People perceive this storytelling as just some kind of fake.
I can also say I have a time machine. And in my case, time machine is looking through an album of historic photos.
Hello, FinTech leaders and builders. I'm Vince Solo from Insart, FinTech Business Accelerator. And this is the next episode of our The Guts, Grit, and the FinTech Podcast. This is the show for strong-minded entrepreneurs, investors, and builders who are not afraid to take the risk to build the sellable products and shape the brighter financial future. And today we will jump straight into the tension that matters the most for a lot of founders on today's market. AI snake oil versus real value, and why founders must focus on selling more and fundraising less, and how to build the strong narrative but not to replace it. And we have a perfect guest to discuss these topics, Vladimir Baranov. Vladimir Baranov, a 3 times founder in FinTech and aerospace, former Chief Technology Officer and founder of Advisor Engine, and today a tech founder coach and executive coach at Human Interfaces. Vladimir has coached and mentored more than 150 startups and founders, and also supports founders through Cornell, London Business School, and Techstars. He has seen FinTech from bank-scale engineering, startup building, and the founder coach seat. Hello, FinTech leaders and builders. I'm Vince Solo from Insart, FinTech Business Accelerator. And this is our next episode of Guts, Grit, and the FinTech. So as you know, this is the show for founders, investors, for builders who are not afraid to take the risk to build sellable products and shape the brighter financial future. And today, we will discuss a topic that is very relevant for specifically early stage founders. And we will discuss the tension between if you need to focus on selling more or if you need to focus on fundraising. And also, what is the importance of narrative to amplify the proof, like not just to replace it. And our today's guest is Vladimir Baranov, and he is a 3 times founder in FinTech and aerospace, and he is former CTO and founder of Advisor Engine. And today, he acts as a tech founder coach and executive coach at his consultancy practice, Human Interfaces. And I know that Vladimir coached and mentored more than 150 founders and supported them from through different initiatives by Cornell, London Business School, and Techstars. So Vladimir, it's very nice to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Vasyl, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, absolutely. And to get started, and for the listeners who doesn't know you, so could you please tell us what is Human Interfaces, and more specifically, so what type of founders typically comes to you, especially when they're stuck?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been in technology field for over 20 years, at least half of that in startup space. And it's been a privilege to observe many other founders, including myself, going through the trials and tribulations of exploring and figuring out the business world and how to do the startups the right way. These days, we have a lot of founders who are themselves engineers and scientists, somebody from technical backgrounds, who are trying to build those fintechs and other techs, and they're facing the world which they have not faced before. They're very versed in technology, but when it comes to world of interpersonal relationships, communication, strategy. They think they might know what they're doing, but reality is they just don't have enough experience. And in my practice, I believe that if I can be a small multiplier at how fast they get that experience, then I could be a lot of help for them to get their businesses started and going, so they don't have as many as bottlenecks, or they don't get as many conflicts as they otherwise would.
So do you work primarily with the tech founders or business founders, meaning that so what we see and with type of founders we work, so there are like two different types of founders.
Yes.
So the one is someone like from mostly like sales, okay, like customer facing roles. And there are other founders like tech founders, someone from engineering, product development roles. So what type of founders you work primarily?
So somebody who is starting a tech business, and we might have a business person coming from the side and they've never started a tech business before, I can help there. But my primary client would be the technical co-founder or a technical person who decided to start a business, because most of the material that I have is helpful to the founders from the technical background.
So what are the differences between these two types of founders?
Yeah, excellent question. I think it comes down to the way that we perceive our reality. So let's say if you take marketing and sales, while there are rules and guidelines of some sort, in the end, it's your personal decision which guides your company forward. If you take about, let's say, a technical task, most of the time you have to figure out what are the fundamental units of that solution. You kind of need to build it on first principles. So in the end, that everything kind of works repeatedly. It's not the same thing when it comes to interaction with the humans, again, the business side. So we have slightly different characters. Somebody who thinks very quantitatively and everything has to be logical in order for millions of variables to work together, and somebody who is working more by the seat of their pants, because it's important in marketing and sales to be adjusting real time to the reaction from somebody who you're trying to sell or trying to have a conversation with.
So do you believe that tech founders can really sell the products that they're building?
I believe a lot of people's brains are morphable. I believe in metaplasticity of brain, where over time you can learn any skill. Now, some of us are predisposed to certain skills than others, but overall, I think many people can learn very well how to do the other person's task. Now, it just requires a complete shift in the mindset where somebody who's been building, let's say, only engineering projects have to do sales, and vice versa. Somebody who's been doing sales needs to do engineering tasks if they want to. And generally that switch is not overnight and takes a little bit of time. However, you can accelerate that transition by use of analogies for somebody who's been on both sides of the divide. Let's say like myself, who can tell you what it's like on the other side and what is the knowledge that you already have that you can leverage as part of that learning. And I can give you an example. For example, in sales, the analogy that I like to use is that surfing in the ocean. Market itself is full of waves going up, going down. You don't know when they're going to start. You don't know when they're going to break. And the way that you can analogize the sales process itself is your ability to use the surfboard, right? So anytime you pick up the phone, you're trying to sell something to somebody, you're exposing yourself to the ocean. But over time, your surfing skill becomes much better, and your thus sales skill become much better because your intuition gets developed on the data from the market. It's not something, let's say, analogous to engineering, something you can pick up from the book. It's only you yourself, your body, your ears, your facial recognitions can learn only over time as you are exposed to it.
So following on that, especially for the tech founders, so what is actually selling on the early stages of the company?
So selling in the early stages of a company is actually more about testing out and understanding what are the pain points of the organizations and individuals that you're selling to. Because you really don't have everything ready yet. You're still working on your product. And what you're really exploring as a concept of a need or a problem that you're solving, and you need to validate whether your target demographic, target ICP actually has those problems through the process called customer discovery. Through a set of interviews, through a set of questions, you actually validate whether or not that is an actual pain that needs to be solved.
So everything you just described, we see this is the problem for tech founders, that in many cases, they're just not doing that. So they're very focused on building, especially when we have some startups with just technical founders, like founders with a technical background and no like a sales background.
Yes.
And this is, to us, it's like one point, like one of the stuck problems. Like they're stuck with building, but not validating whether this would be used by real market. So how would you help that type of founders? And what other like major like stuck problems have you seen?
Yeah, of course. So one is basically assessment and coming to the same page that the answer to the problem that you're trying to solve is not inside your own head. Up to that point, a lot of engineering skill is about interpreting the problem statement, which somebody else wrote. A problem statement in its own is a bet against the market that hopefully validates the need that exists out there and the solution solves it. So over time, let's say somebody spent in engineering, let's say 15, 20 years, they've been solving somebody else's defined problems. And they're really good at that. And when we are left to our own devices, we default to doing the thing that we're really good at, right? Because it validates ourselves, our identity, the thing, and then we build something. But it's like building a bridge over a place which has no river. And obviously you can build it on a valley, but just like if you stick with the analogy, it's the same thing when you're building a product when you have no market validated. And again, it's kind of asking the question of the founder. Your question was about how do we move away from that? It's like, how are you sure that any portion of the thing that you build is actually will be used by the market? Who is your signal, right? Who is your beta customer, right? What is that signal? Are you going to your friends who are saying, that's a great idea? Well, do you think that's a strong signal? I don't think so. Because most of the time, friends will tell you something that they would think that you would want to hear. Yeah, there are some people who criticize, but unless the money gets transferred from somebody's pocket into yours for the value that's right with the product, everything else is kind of not really a strong signal. So how can you design your build in a way that you can iteratively validate that this signal is out there? Yes, with the age of AI, absolutely can build as much product as possible before you go to the market. But I'm going to tell you another thing. How do you know which part of the product people are actually not vibing with? Where do they reject it, right? If you have designed 1,000 features right away, you don't know if which of those 1,000 features people are rejecting, right? And why did they walk away? And if you don't have those processes for interacting with the market, interacting with individual users, then you kind of be left in the state of unknown of why you're not getting an additional traction.
Vladimir, so you have a pretty unique path. So basically as an engineer and builder from Citi and Deutsche Bank, then as a startup founder and CTO and builder of Nestag and Advisor Engine, and now coaching other founders. So like, what are the major lessons learned, okay, that changed your way to judge whether the founders actually building something real, especially on the early stage when you just have maybe some of the signals, but not like a real proofs yet?
Yeah. Well, to my own detriment, I've learned that technology is actually not important at all when it comes to sales. And that's something probably if you pick any individual engineer would probably tell you vice versa, that as part of sales, it's important to what you have, so you sell what you have. But you can sell a lot of things without actually having it. And until you're able to do that, I'm not saying you need to be untruthful. It's more that you understand what the value is and you found the customer who is willing to pay for that value. Figuring that out is actually the most important thing for a business. Not for technology, for a business. So if you want to have a business that actually runs and works well, that part is the most crucial to exist. You can build the most fantastic technology, but if you don't have the sales connection or the understanding of the market, that beautiful technology will remain what it is, beautiful, and will go to the museum as an art piece, and not necessarily something that will fuel the business. The business itself, most of the time, can be abstracted and be run just through spreadsheets and a phone call. Yes, not very optimally, but as long as it solves the business need, that is still possible. So that would probably be my main takeaway from that transition.
So, and how would you understand that, these are actually positive, let's say, early stage signals that the startup is solving a real problem? So yes, you can run this non-ideally using spreadsheets, but before the revenue arises. So what are the strongest early signals that startup, that is a proof that startup is solving a real problem?
Yes. So I would say actually revenue is the strongest signal, because if you cannot get anybody to pay for any version of your product, even for the future one, then you probably are solving a wrong problem. Now, I'm sure there are different versions of that, and there is different ways of describing the need. Let's say if you're not in tech field, let's say if you're solving cancer, that cancer is probably not going to be solved by the time you're done, and you don't need to do that incrementally. I'm only focusing on SaaS products, and a lot of SaaS products have been going through a lot of turmoil given the AI. But with SaaS product, most of it can be solved using spreadsheet manually. Because if you're solving somebody's problem, they're more likely to give you money. If you're solving just for their user experience and not for necessarily the output, because you're making your UI and UX beautiful, well, they're experiencing that, but they might not want to pay for that. What is that thing that you're offering as a value that people actually want to pay money for? How can you minimize that in a way that you can, let's say, develop over the weekend or these days, maybe even shorter, over a few hours, that you can have prospective users test and actually say, yeah, for real, I'll pay money for that. Because if not money, they can pay even the smallest amount, right? Will they pay $1? Will they pay 50 cents? Will they pay 25 cents for that? And all of a sudden you have revenue, you have signal. Because if somebody is not willing to pay you 25 cents month to month for your product, you clearly are not offering any value.
But is it really scalable? Because sometimes, and especially in early stage, you already can have the some revenue, some trial projects, but it's not repeatable. So how would you understand that you're moving in the right direction, especially when you already started to earn some revenue?
Got it. So think of it as more an unknown. You're in a dark forest and you're trying to find an exit. What is your strategy for those paths to take you to the exit? You try to go in different directions. For how many steps are you going to go? What information are you finding as you go in that direction? How many paths can you actually take until you're starved because you no longer have any money or any food? And the same kind of analogy applies when you're trying to discover where the most traction will come from your business. Some people who have been spending in the industry many, many decades may tell you the direction, but they still might not be right. Because if they spend so many years in the industry, they might be at such a high level that at your entry level, their advice might not be actually useful. But it's still valid to listen to those advice so you can test those assumptions and you can test whether or not that gains traction, right? So you have an external information. In the end, it's a series of experiments, a series of paths into dark forest that you're trying to experiment on and see which one will get you the most traction. As you're doing those experiments, you're generating data. And the more data you have, the more the more regressions you can run, the more convergence you can run. So eventually that data leads you to the place of the greatest traction in that particular area. Do we know the whole layout of the market? Probably not, especially with respect of a new business that you have just started that has not maybe existed before. There could have been analogs before, but it is really up to you to map out that market step by step. Now, I just wanted to address as far as like recurring fact. Look for always opportunities for that recurring revenue, not just one-off. So when I mentioned somebody's willing to pay a quarter MRR, you have your first recurring revenue. Now, it's incredibly small, right? But you already crossed a gap where somebody is actually willing to pay you that much. Because if you cannot convince somebody for whatever you build, pay you a quarter per month, then you're probably building a wrong thing or you're selling it to the wrong customer.
So there is another problem here. Okay, so you could have one founder, you could have maybe two, maybe up to three founders. Still, the capacity is very limited, especially on the early stages. And you can be focused on selling, but you would need additional resources. And now we're talking about fundraising.
Yes.
So what's your take on, should the founders be still focused on selling and getting like initial revenue, and or like at what stage they need to start thinking and start acting against the fundraising? So should they ever like focus on fundraising, or like what's your take here?
Yes. I think they should start fundraising as soon as they possibly can. And I'll tell you why, because the fundraising itself is not always the fundraising. It's also the information that you're going to pick up by talking to those investors. They will offer you opportunities for a pivot. They will tell you how perhaps they've seen other companies that are doing some things. And while you might be the smartest person in the world and have all AI, it still doesn't have all the information that is inside other people's heads, especially if they're having a lot of one-on-one conversations and you're not part of that. So think of it as fundraising as just another source of information that helps you to decide which path in the forest you want to pursue more or less, right? Because if you're going to talk to somebody who's possibly funding you, they might tell you, hey, stop doing this, but I have $5 million for this problem. Can you solve that, right? There's no way for you to anticipate that offer unless you're in that conversation. And so my advice here is that go ahead and fundraise from day one, have at least 1 or 2 conversations per week, but it doesn't necessarily have to be of fundraising nature. Like your goal is to extract information from that relationship and just retain that relationship when you truly get into fundraising, because you can go back and that relationship will be more established and they will know what you're about.
It could be a little bit controversial, but should you actually trust the information that you're getting from the investors?
I think you should not trust any information you're getting from anybody. So in the sense, like you have to have your own models of the universe. And when you're getting data, how do you know that data is information or it's just noise? But when you're going to get multiple sources and you're going to have multiple pieces of information, you can compare them against each other and your own experience and your own eyes and your own insights and your own users, you're going to be able to position that piece of information. Now, I don't think necessarily it could be wrong information. It gives you information against which you can actually move along. Maybe whatever information they provide you and you think they're wrong, maybe they're right for another type of founder or another type of a fund, and you're going to be able to connect them as part of your networking activities and perhaps barter out some other relationship as part of that.
So following on like how to treat the information, I think we have discussed this with you before about like the importance of narrative. And when you really have some signal and you really validated some demand, how important is to really build a strong narrative around these positive signals that you have validated?
Yeah, great question. What is a narrative, right? The way I define it, it's a story that is easily passed from one person to another because it's structured, it has a beginning, it has the ending, it has a purpose, it has a meaning. And once it becomes a short story, it's much easier for other people to spread it along. So if right now you have a in the beginning, you might have a little bit of a disjointed story. You may have some successes, but if you weave it into a more predictable story, maybe a predictable tagline or predictable something that another person can pass along, that information about you gets spread out further that you yourself can reach. And thus you have a much further marketing reach than anybody else. If you still have parts of your organization or part of your startup kind of still on different shelf, and it takes you, 20 minutes to explain what you're doing, it's unlikely that what you're doing is going to be flowing in many different directions, because nobody has 20 minutes to speak to somebody else, especially if they're not invested into it, to explain what you're doing. So generally, I always advocate to have some sort of simple pitch, simple story, a very easily shareable story and narrative that could propagate as far as possible in your market.
So do you see any difference between like narrative and the storytelling? Because sometimes people perceive the storytelling as, as just some kind of fake, like meaning you are not solving some real problem. You do not have validated demand, but you created some kind of storytelling. Okay, and now you're pitching investors, and everything looks great, but you're not actually really solving something here. So that's why. Do you see any difference between like fake storytelling and having a really strong narrative?
Yeah. So I just wanted to separate from my definition's perspective. To me, storytelling is more of a skill. In a sense, if you have a really bad story, if you have a really good storyteller, you might get rescued. But if you have a bad storyteller, no matter how good your story is, it still might come out flat or boring or not emotional, and it will not carry its weight. Does the story have to solve a problem? That's an interesting question, but kind of goes to what storytelling is about. Storytelling is telling somebody else about the thing that might have a problem with. So storytelling in the context may be an attempt to find out whether or not pain is real, right? So I can tell you a story about a time machine. Now, both of us know that time machine is not possible, but let's say hypothetically you don't know about that. What I might hear as I'm talking about time machine is actually you have a lot of interest. And what I can say is that, hey, we are building time machine. Would you like to be part of that journey? Now, am I telling something not truthful? Am I lying? Am I saying something that is not solving the problem? Not necessarily, because my goal of the storytelling was actually to find out whether or not you're actually interested. And interested does not necessarily mean a sale just yet, right? And as long as you position your company in a way that, hey, we're trying to solve this problem. It's a very difficult problem, but if you want to come on a journey with us, we might be able to solve this problem more effectively. None of those words are lies, because every venture, if phrased correctly, is a ton of risk where everybody involved can lose all of their money invested. Now, if somebody's telling a story in a way that they're promising the things to deliver and does not disclose a level of risk, then if you have a very crafty storyteller, I can see where that would be a complete bad thing to do. But if you are transparent with the risks involved, then I think storytelling or narrative style has nothing to do with that. It's more what it means to the end, and are you trying to fool the people that you're speaking with?
Yeah, and now, speaking about the storytelling, the founders, they like to add, like, we use AI. So, and when you hear that, what instantly makes you thinking, like, is it real or is it just a fake?
Yeah. I think there is always the case for somebody labeling something and for the party which is listening to validate whether or not the thing which they're saying is actually correct. I'm not saying that people are lying on purpose, and there are many different definitions of different words, but it is good to ask, like, hey, you said this. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by AI? How do you use AI? Because both parties can walk away thinking that they've said one thing and received another thing, and be on completely different pages, right? So are there instances where certain startups misrepresent what they're doing from AI perspective? Absolutely. But misrepresentation, again, goes to the place where if parties have different definitions of what AI is, then I can also say, I have a time machine. And in my case, time machine is looking through an album of historic photos. I feel like I'm in a time machine, right? And I can still walk through the world thinking that it's true. In your case, it might be actual teleportation. So it's good sometimes to come to the terms and definitions which are similar between two parties before we say that.
I like this example about the time machine. Really great,
Right. So and will we see some opportunists trying to throw in, let's say, AI to take advantage of somebody who is not familiar with what they're doing? To a degree, there's also a middle case. Anytime you throw in AI, you're kind of obligated to learn a little bit more about it. And if your company states that they have AI, they probably went through internal process thinking like, if we're stating we're doing AI, what exactly does it mean? So that means that the company has actually spent time educating themselves a little bit on what AI is. So I would not, and this is a plural statement in a sense, just because the company is stating AI, I'm going to say they're already closer to AI companies, which are through and through AI, than to the companies which are not stating AI. Now, I'm not part of all those conversations, so I think it's very contextual to see like whether some people are doing it on purpose to fool investors or they just misrepresenting what they're building.
Okay, so then to have a really strong narrative around AI, when should you actually you're building AI, and when you must not do this? Like, what are the real use cases? Have you seen like recently when you need to double down? Yes, we're actually building something around AI, and this is a strong narrative. And when you need to avoid it at all?
Yeah, I don't think there's such a clear rule. I would say it always depends on the audience that you're interacting with. Let's say if you're speaking to not tech audience, they're probably going to be more familiar with the word AI than machine learning, right? Because if you include the AI terminology with audience which is not informed, they're like, okay, I got it right away. But if you say machine learning, you might be able to confuse them more. So I don't know if there's a clear case whether you should be using AI or not should be using AI. I'm going to say it depends on the audience that you're working with. Now, we are still, I think, as humans, not yet 100% figured out how we're going to label AI. Like, is machine learning still AI? Is a regression or let's say reinforcement learning, is it still AI or is it sub-function of AI? I'm sure there are very smart people who will tell me there's a hierarchy. But from kind of more layman terms, I don't think we have that yet in the society so far as like going back and forth. Now, if you are a startup founder and you have certain definitions, you can back into those and say, this is how we define AI. And to the audience, which is informed and technical, they will understand where you're coming from. But I think all those definitions right now are still floating in time, and we haven't settled yet on the final version.
Vladimir, to sum up our conversation, so if you could give the founders only one rule for talking about AI in their pitches, so what would it be?
I would say be ready to walk it through of how it is implemented and defined in your company. So the way that you're labeling as part of the narrative makes sense and could be supported.
Vladimir, thank you very much for this conversation. So I really like the analogy of the time machine, and that you always need to understand what's the actual definition of the term, because like the time machine could be different for different people, whether they are like the photos, as you mentioned, or whether this is a real teleportation technology. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Of course, Vasyl. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And to all the fintech leaders and builders who are watching us today, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, to like this video and hit the bell button so you wouldn't miss the next episode with the great founders, investors, and operators who are shaping the future of fintech. It was me, Vince Solo from Insart FinTech Business Accelerator, together with Vladimir Baranov from Human Interfaces. Let's keep building the fintech and the brighter financial future together. Thank you and see you soon.